All right. Well, thank you everyone for sticking with us through to the discussion session this afternoon. Joining us for this session will be presenters from the day. Melanie will join us in just a few minutes. Deeza, Allison, and Amber and Tiffany will also be joining us. Tiffany will be responding via the chat box if you have any questions for her. We'll also be hearing from a couple of reactors. Fellow NIDLR grantees will discuss how these presentations have effect for their NIDLR grants. First up, we'll hear from Jennifer Moore from the Rehabilitation Institute of Chicago. And we'll also hear from Jess Shakin. I know it says on the slide we are hearing from Bonnie Zink, but Bonnie unfortunately had an illness, so she won't be able to join us here. And Jess has wonderfully stepped in with just a call a few minutes ago. So thank you very much, Jess. So during this discussion session, we want it to be as interactive as possible. So please post your questions and responses in the chat box. If you did not get a chance to ask your questions to a presenter during the conference, this is now your chance. So, and also feel free to comment or ask questions to any of the discussants in the room. Like yesterday, we'll start off with a few polls to have a better understanding of the experiences of those in the room, and then we'll reflect on each of these presentations from the afternoon led by our reactors. So let's start with a few poll questions. And if you have any trouble with the polls, please reach out to us at connectsupport@intosolve.com or call 512-681-7272, extension 676. So our first question is, are you a NIDLR grantee? Let's see. I think yesterday we had about 50% NIDLR grantees, 44% non-grantees, and a few respondents weren't quite sure. And so today it looks like we have a few more NIDLR grantees, 60% are NIDLR grantees, whereas 40% are not. The second question that I'd like to ask is, please indicate the primary priority area of your work. Wow, it looks like we have a lot of employment outcomes grantees in the room. Yesterday we did too. I think they led the poll, but the other groups were not far behind. So today it looks like we have mostly KT, knowledge translation grantees, and then participation in community living. So thank you all for voting. And now our final poll for today. How familiar are you with the KT planning template? Was today the first day you heard about it? Have you heard about it but never used it? Or were you very familiar? You've used it before. All right. It looks like a lot of people have heard about it, and about a quarter of them have used it, and about 30% had heard about it for the first time. So we hope that you found those sessions about the KT planning template and its application for tech transfer useful. So now I'm going to turn it over to Jenny Moore, and she'll discuss her reaction to Melanie Barwick's presentation on the KT planning template, and a bit about the tech transfer planning template presented by Jennifer Flagg. So Jenny?
Hi, thank you, Anne. Melanie, are you also on the line?
I am, yes.
Okay, great. I have several questions for you during this reaction as well. Thanks again for asking me to participate in the conference in this way. I've been asked to respond to Melanie Barwick's presentation on the knowledge translation planning template. First of all, Melanie, thank you for your presentation and for developing this terrific resource. If the conference participants haven't done so already, I highly recommend going to Melanie's website and downloading the template. Personally, I haven't used the template. I have seen it, I've heard about it in the past, but after Melanie's great explanation of it today, I really better understand how I could use it, and I plan to use it in the future. And also for some of the projects that I'm currently working on now. So in Melanie's presentation, she provided a step-by-step planning guide that will support researchers in development of a knowledge translation plan. As Melanie mentioned, it is critical to start thinking about knowledge translation and the plan for knowledge translation at the initial stages of planning a research program. This is so important for many reasons, from ensuring that your research is relevant, to satisfy payers and the funding agency, and to demonstrate impact, and to ensure your research is used to advance science and practice. So I really felt that Melanie also did a great job describing some ways to think about knowledge translation impact, and provided us with a very practical knowledge translation planning template that can be used by research scientists to develop a knowledge translation plan. One thing I'd really like to highlight from Melanie's presentation is that I felt that you did a really terrific job of describing why it's important for all research scientists, regardless of the type of research, from bench to clinical research, that everyone should develop a knowledge translation plan from the beginning stages of a project or proposal. And in my opinion, knowledge translation is such a critical aspect of research, so planning for it from the initial stages will really help to ensure the success of knowledge translation and ultimately the translation of this information so it can inform or possibly even change the way we deliver our care. So there are several aspects of this presentation that I would like to discuss, as well as several questions for Melanie. I'd also like to reiterate Anne's comment that it would be great for the conference participants who have questions to also post them in the chat box so that we can have a very interactive discussion about Melanie's presentation, and also how we could potentially use this information in our proposals and our currently funded grant projects. So Melanie, I have a very general knowledge translation question for you. And this is something that was briefly brought up at the end of your presentation, and it's related to terminology. I think the terminology that is used in knowledge translation can be quite confusing, and it seems to vary based on within different countries. So is there a publication or a resource that defines the terms or compares the terms that you can point us to?
Not in the way that I sort of have conceptualized. I mean, we have it embedded in our knowledge translation training, both the courses that we provide here, the scientist knowledge translation training and the knowledge translation professional certificate. So it's in those manuals, but of course those are only available if you take the course. You know, it's maybe it's a to-do item. You know, relative to writing a little debate paper or this or that about terminology.
Yeah, I think that would be extremely helpful. And as a grantee, and I think that many of the grantees might still feel the same way about this, it would be really helpful for us to all use the same terminology so that we can better communicate with each other, and then also with others in the field about our knowledge translation related activities. So it is certainly something that's confusing, and then also thinking about implementation science and how that fits in with the overall concept of knowledge translation. Having some publication would be very helpful.
I think I'm the only one who talks about it with respect to KT goals. And so I think if you think about KT goal before you think of definition, in a way, it helps you to figure out how the terms are related to one another. Because if you think of a space where you try and where people will say, well, knowledge translation is the same thing as implementation, that it just doesn't make sense in a practical sense, because knowledge translation strategies apply to things that have nothing to do with practice change. So when we write a journal article, when we present, when we go and talk to people, when we do a webinar, we don't necessarily have practice change as our intended goal. And so it's not equivalent, right? So But yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
and I think that's helpful, and to think about conceptually in that way is very helpful. It also blends very well with the knowledge translation planning template that you've provided. To move on a little bit more about this great resource that you've developed, I feel like the knowledge translation planning template is very practical template for us to use to think about our knowledge translation plan. It provides a great step-by-step process and cues us to think about many very important considerations related to knowledge translation. As you mentioned, one of the errors that is commonly made when developing a knowledge translation plan is that the knowledge translation goals, audience, and strategies aren't always aligned. And I think that's a really important point, and I think that you've made some really great adaptations to your worksheet to help guide us through thinking about how we could potentially link these together. And then also describe the knowledge translation plan for each audience, including the goals and the strategies for each of them. So I think that this template does a really nice job of helping us link these three aspects together, and then also describes the level of research available for each of the research strategies, which is also helpful. Now, can you point us to any resources that will help us better link the targeted strategies, that might be more successful with specific audiences? Is there any information available about that we might think, okay, with this particular audience, we might want to use these particular strategies?
Not in the way that makes it an easy recipe. So, I mean, certainly I would point you to go and look at up-to-date systematic reviews and to do a bit of a critical appraisal of their methodologies. But, you know, I think back in the day we did think we would eventually get to a point where for this type of evidence, for this KT goal, for this audience, go here, use this. I don't necessarily think, I mean, it's not to say that's not entirely impossible, but we understand so much more now about context and characteristics of the knowledge user that I think you'd be hard-pressed to make it that formulaic. And it would also take away from the process of, you know, the reflexive process of developing a KT plan and incorporating the user perspective if it became too rote. So, you know, I think that there continues to be evidence produced along the lines of different strategies and how they've been used. And, you know, there's a growing evidence base in knowledge translation, in arts-based knowledge translation, rather. Probably enough there that there's probably even a systematic review of arts-based knowledge translation, although I haven't looked. There's so much emerging now in terms of the use of altmetrics and social media for knowledge translation. Again, I haven't done dipped in to see if anybody's written any systematic reviews, but there are some really interesting studies coming out about how people are using text and text messaging and a variety of other strategies for KT. You know, I think just knowing your audience would give you some hints about which strategies are not necessarily going to lend themselves to that particular context. So, you know, very laborious, time-related strategies like web-based repositories for teachers might not be the best way to communicate, but it depends what you're using that modality for. If you're using it to share knowledge and build their awareness is one thing, but as we understand practice change now, it's far more complicated. And, you know, the first wave of KT research really tried to demonstrate practitioner change as a result of things like reminders, decision support, audit and feedback, et cetera, et cetera. And these studies were done with randomized controlled trials. The randomization is not problematic, but the control piece is, because as we've gone deeper into understanding the constructs that are related to successful implementation, things that are talked about in the CIFAR model and other models, you start to realize how you really can't control for these things, and you need more mixed methods, hybrid designs to account for the complexity of what's going on. Long-winded response, but yeah.
Okay, well,
Short answer,
that was
no. It's not formulaic.
okay. I'm sorry, I didn't hear that one.
I said the short answer is no. It's not formulaic, but you know.
I see, but your response was helpful. Thank you. I was also wondering, I thought that was the point that people are commonly making this error. It was a very good point, and I learned a lot from that. Are there any other errors that are commonly made when using this template?
I think, I'm not entirely sure if there are errors that happen when you do the template. We haven't collected that level of feedback from people, although the French version is going to be tested out in a course in Montreal in November, and so presumably they'll get some information back for what the experience was like. I also posted a link to our knowledge translation game, our KT game. It's up in the interactive discussion chat area.
Okay.
And this is a manipulatable, sort of a card game, essentially, that is that maps onto the template and allows you to sit down with cards for strategies and audiences and such to kind of use as a discussion aid, if you will, around a particular scenario. So you could bring your own scenario. We want to develop a KT plan for our particular project, or you could use one of the scenarios that come on the KT cards and practice your skills. And we actually just took our course group. We have the Knowledge Translation Professional Certificate happening this week in Toronto, and our course group of 18 people just played the game this afternoon. And one of the comments about the game was it helps you to be really mindful about how much you're taking on, because at one point you have every strategy laid out, you have every knowledge user audience laid out, and you realize this is not feasible anymore, so I need to scale back. So I think these tools help you to be comprehensive. I think they help you to develop or to ensure some feasibility about your KT plans, just by virtue of anecdotal feedback from people.
Great. Well, I will definitely take a look at the KT game. It sounds really interesting and a really nice way to try to put it all together. Now, you talked a little bit about how this template is really to be used for planning a knowledge translation plan for a research project, and it's not really intended to be used as an implementation template to implement something into clinical practice. I know of different frameworks and implementation processes that can be used, but are you familiar with any implementation templates that are similar to this that have been developed?
No, but we have put in a proposal to develop one. So,
yeah,
you know,
I was hoping
the funding, God's willing, we, you know, without giving away all our secrets, we have put in for, because it's more process-oriented, this whole task of implementing evidence, it's not necessarily going to be a, you know, multi-page. It's not going to look the same. It's going to be have a different format, but we're hoping we get funded to develop that, in which case we would also be doing a randomized control trial to test it out in a couple of different sectors, because our intent would be to develop implementation guidance that is universal enough based on what we've learned in implementation science now, where the guidance could be applicable regardless of who you were working with, or whether you were working in health, global health, education, mental health, what have you. So stay tuned.
That sounds great. Good luck with the funding. I hope it comes through. It sounds like it could be a really great tool as well. I do have one more question about the template, and I have a couple of other general questions and comments about the presentation. But this other question relates to Jennifer Flagg's presentation. She presented a technology transfer planning template that was somewhat similar to yours, that is under development but will be available online next year. She indicated that the questions were on the template were based on steps from the need to know knowledge model for commercial devices and evaluation criteria used for the SBIR commercialization plan. But in her presentation, she recommended that people who are using your template and answer a few specific questions. It was question 5, which knowledge users or audiences will you target if someone enters the private sector or industry? And then someone who responds to question 7, what are your knowledge translation goals for knowledge users or the audience, that it would be to inform a product or a patent, that they might then want to go and use their technology transfer planning template. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about how these two templates could potentially interact, and I could kind of envision having this implementation template that would be similar and somehow triggered as well, depending on the goals of the project. But how do you envision these working together to really fully support research scientists and moving through this whole KT process?
Good question. I think there's some level of linkage now that could happen. So off the top of my head, I'm sort of writing myself a note that once the TTPT is available, is that we maybe do a slight revision to our planning template so that we include a URL to theirs. They're conceptually linked, and a similar thing might happen with respect to our implementation resource if we are so lucky as to get funded to develop it. So, I mean, I think we can link them. Having them all on one platform and all sort of spitting out information in report format to you, maybe one day, but I don't envision that in the near future. I think it's, it's suitable for people now. The other thing that we could also do is, the planning template has sort of, what is it called? It's not really a compendium, but sort of a little instructional guide about it that sits. It wasn't developed by me. It sits on the website for the National Collaborating Centre for Methods and Tools out of McMaster in Toronto, in Ontario rather, in Hamilton. And so if you look on their sort of repository of tools and you find the KTPT, they also have sort of like a little 2 or 3 pager about it. And when people have asked me, can we adapt the tool, can we do this and that, my sort of initial response years ago was yes, but now I've sort of gone with, you know what, just leave the tool the way it is, but if you need to write a 2 or 3 page guidance that goes along with it for an either audience or a different kind of audience, then go ahead. Like here are the implications for using the tool for people who are funded by such and such. And I think that's the way to do it, and that might be another place to alert people as to these other related resources that might be relevant for them.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That is helpful. I have a couple more questions, but I'm going to go to the chat box real quick. Some people are posting some questions on here. One PL said, are you aware of the wiki What is KT? It lists all manners, all terms using KT. Have you seen this one before? I haven't looked at it previously.
I have. I haven't done sort of a compare and contrast with our conceptualization that we, that we have here at the kids versus theirs. So I can't.
Okay. And then Anne has asked for you to talk a bit more about the collaboration capacity building indicators you presented. What would you look to see with your partners, such as practitioners, community organizations, is effective?
Mm-hmm. I think in a way, depending on how you conceptualize integrated KT, this might be a tool to evaluate to what extent was your integrated KT successful, which is a question that people are not asking. This particular tool that I shared, because you can use it repeatedly over time, so it's a repeated measure sort of thing. I think what it tells you is something far richer than simply asking the question about, was this collaboration worth your while, yes or no? And so looking over time at shifts in terms of people's connections, what learning they derive from it, what impacts they thought they had working with this group, it just sort of, is a way of tracking outcomes. And then lastly, I also think the comparison between what people hope to see emerging from the collaboration versus what they actually experience is useful, right? Because you can use that in a sort of a formative evaluative way to, do a check-in with your group every 6 months or so or at some other interval and say, well, the expectations were pretty high that we were going to have some actions coming out of this collaboration, but if you ask people, they're kind of saying it's not really happening. So how can we intervene to sort of make a shift there?
Mm-hmm. And how would you, just expanding on this question a little bit more, how often would you want to evaluate that impact to kind of check in to see, is this effective so that you could potentially change course or do something differently to improve its impact?
I think that partly depends on who the evaluation stakeholders are and what questions they have and what value they place on answering those questions. Mm-hmm. It also depends on your time frame. Are you doing, is this a table or a group or a collaborative that exists over many years, in which case you might do it annually? Is it a time delineated collaboration where you might want to have an opportunity over a 2-3 year period to make some adaptations to how you're working together so that you can reach the best outcomes for that collaboration? It really depends.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And I had one more question related to impact, the knowledge translation impact. I think that this is actually a really challenging component, understanding the impact of a project. And I'm assuming that you talked about reach indicators, quality indicators, use indicators. With a lot of the work that I've done, I've found that the perceived use seems to be a little bit higher than actual use of some of the things, and most of the work I've done is related to implementation and practice. And I'm wondering if you found similar things with some of these other aspects of knowledge translation, and if there are other ways that actual use can be assessed that you know of.
So it depends what you mean by use. If you're saying, can you measure over time whether people are changing their practice?
Yeah, or they might say, I'm going to the website and I'm using the template for this for various aspects of a project. I think what I've seen in practice is that there's a higher perception of use than actual use. And I'm wondering if you've seen similar disconnect in some of the work that you've done related to these other aspects of knowledge translation, and if there are other ways to assess actual use of the information. That makes sense.
Yeah, I know what you're getting at, but I don't know if I can give you sort of a one-off response. I think because it's so iterative and really specific to your context, you need to think that through. And to really know what people are doing, you have to think about who you're going to ask, how are you going to sample them, how are you going to retain them because you're going to ask and check in with them over a period of time. Are you going to just do self-report, or is there going to be some other objective means by which you can ascertain whether they are in fact doing what they say they're doing? Then you're kind of into fidelity measurement in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I can see it can be very complicated.
Mhm.
Yeah. And there was one more question in the chat box about this. Can you anticipate any ways use of the tool might be different in contexts where one might expect unusually high participation from people with disabilities? That was from Kathleen Murphy.
Interesting. I mean, off the top of my head, I think if it was using the tool on the part of someone with a disability, it probably doesn't lend itself to people who have visual impairments. Not considered that. I think fairly plain languaged. I think, though, I can't see why there would be an issue here for application of any KT strategies or inclusion of the creation of KT strategies amongst, project groups that are inclusive of people with disabilities. I wonder if Kathleen had some things in mind.
Yeah. Kathleen, are you still on, or can you type anything else in to the chat box to elaborate on your question?
Or just, do you, Kathleen, think that there might be some unusual or some things to think about for use of the tool with people with disabilities?
Hi, yeah, I'm here on the line. So, I mean, in some ways, I'm trying to make it clear to the audience that we are aware that we are being funded by NIDLR, and so we always want to be thinking about any issue through this particular lens. And we look forward, Melanie, to working with you in the coming years to discuss this really thoroughly and invite anyone who's a NIDLR grantee who's listening to join in, to join us in talking through these issues. Off the top of my head, or not just the top of my head, and looking through your tool, we could consider whether or not for our community, if we wanted to have a section that looked specifically at accessibility issues in the outreach.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good point.
Yes.
So basically a reminder, have they considered accessibility issues in the creation of their plan?
Correct.
Or in the use of particular strategies. So I mean, if they are doing webinars, are those webinars accessible by people who have a disability? If they are doing a visual presentation and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Right, and then that would affect the budgeting for it. And it's my understanding that different popular social media. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Jessica's also adding, so what about cross-cultural issues? I mean, I was also thinking the same thing in terms of, it's about being mindful of ethics, cultural sensitivity, cultural competence, and cultural sensitivity might also encompass sensitivity around people with accessibility issues of one kind or another. I suppose I maybe ignorantly assume we're all aware of these things, and we just by rote of how we conduct ourselves in our research and our collaborations are mindful of these things, but that's probably a bit naive.
These are good points. Does anyone else have any other questions or comments that they'd like to post in the chat room about Melanie's presentation? All right, that is all of that's all of the comments that I had about it. Thank you, Melanie, for answering my questions and having this great discussion about this. I thought it was your presentation was terrific and very, very helpful.
Well, thank you for the great questions. It's certainly given me some ideas about how to go to the next iteration, and for the addition of the to-do paper. Thanks.
Yeah. Please do that. Put that to-do paper.
Try and get on that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Melanie, again. And Jenny, thank you for your reaction today. That was really helpful and insightful. If folks have more questions that come up, feel free to email them to us at ktdrr.cedal.org, and we'll relay them to Melanie. But now we're going to switch gears a bit and talk more about social media. Like I said earlier, we have Jessica Shakin joining us and not Bonnie Zink, who is on the slide in front of us. And you guys might remember Jess from yesterday's reaction session, so thank you, Jess, for joining us again. She's the Media and Information Services Manager at the National Rehabilitation Information Center, or NARIC. So, Jess, take it away.
Great, thanks. Thank you guys for a great presentation, Bonnie. I hope things improve as soon as possible for you. Some of my initial reactions in watching and listening to the presentation was, you look at things like these planning guides and these big spreadsheets, and we're talking about social media, which can seem like such a fleeting thing. You know, you put a post on Facebook or on Twitter, and it has a life of a few minutes or maybe a few hours, and then it's gone again. But you've spent how much time in planning that 140-character statement, or that fact sheet that you attach to a Facebook post. And I think it can seem overwhelming. And when I look at the big spreadsheet, part of my brain says, why am I spending so much time on something that's going to last such a little bit? But I think we can clearly see that the potential for impact is quite large. And I really appreciated the discussion about the different ways that we can measure that impact and where we can look. I had a couple of questions for Allison, who in the Midwest Regional Spinal Cord Injury Center, and they're taking this great tool and putting it into use. I wanted to know what you found to be the easiest part of it and what was the most challenging part.
Sure. Actually, I would say the easiest part of it was deciding which channel we were going to kind of, I guess, attack first, for lack of a better word. And as far as the most difficult part, for us, it's really been figuring out how to allocate our resources. So we're very quickly getting kind of that planning together as far as what our content's going to be, but how we make sure that it is consistent, because I think we've all seen a number of cases where different groups have either Facebook pages or other social media presence where they start with this huge bang and things are being put on there every day, and for a few weeks it's just really going and going, and then all of a sudden it peters out and you're seeing posts once a week, a couple times a month, things like that. And we've actually come up with a plan using kind of the hierarchy of our team at the model system, where we've got our kind of starting at the base with our research assistants, who, you know, they're working hard every day, going and getting, collecting data, cleaning data, doing retention issues, doing recruitment issues, and they're the ones who are in most contact with our participants and their caregiving network. They talk to them every day, receive emails, get requests, get calls. So really kind of mining what it is their interaction has been was where we had to figure out a way to make time available for them to have effort in this. So it's really been a lot more restructuring than initially anticipated to make that effort available. But I think it's really worth it, taking that time to make sure you have that resource base. Not so much in content, that'll come, but making sure that your people have enough time to provide all of their knowledge to it.
Excellent. What did you find the most surprising aspect of utilizing this tool and getting your social media approach up and running?
I think actually the most surprising was the entire use of the personas, figuring out who our audience was. That part was both enlightening and frustrating at the same point. We actually got our
data collectors from various projects together within our department. We've got about 12 people who are collecting data over, I'd say, a couple dozen projects right now, and just asking what it is that our audience at that patient, family member, caregiver level, what it is that they've been asking for, how they've been asking it, what they've been identifying as barriers, and we were able to find these kind of distinct audience characteristics. And we do have a few different audiences that we're really working with. And the biggest thing that I think we're going to have to really put some extra thought into how we're going to address it is there are really different levels of health literacy going forward, and just making sure that our personas address those different levels. So we've even come up with strategies of kind of, okay, are we going to offer at all of our content or different pieces of content at different literacy levels? And so it was, when we first got into it, the persona, we were like, oh, okay, no problem. And then we really started pulling it apart and figuring out how intricate it was going to have to be to understand that. And I guess in correspondence with that, coming up with our own persona actually was easier than we anticipated. It ended up being a case of, here's our problem, who would we pick out to talk to all of these people? But that persona issue is a lot more detailed and a lot more nuanced than it'll first appear. So kind of fair warning on that one.
Yeah. Did you find that you anticipated there would be a kind of persona who didn't show up?
The one that we kind of knew wouldn't be would be our participants or our audience that are older individuals, kind of outside of that. And we're talking about into like the year 80s and 90s. We actually have a number of people in various studies who are in that age group who just have no interest in social media or sometimes in technology in general. So for them, we've got kind of that extenuating family audience that we really want to make sure that we draw in, even if it's a case of what we'll often get is with other projects, if we have a social media presence, we'll get requests from family members of people who are involved in studies for printouts of Facebook pages and can we actually give a phone call to someone and kind of summarize what's been going on in our social media presence, what things we've offered through that. So we've learned that from other projects, and we kind of went for it here knowing that we really have to figure out a way to get that audience so that they weren't missing out.
Sure. That actually brings up an interesting point. I mean, we're spending as much time as we can on social media and trying to make sure that we are where our patrons expect us to be. That are we doing that at the expense of some of the more traditional outlets, or do we, in like identifying your personas, you did identify a group that traditional outreach and traditional media would be more appropriate. So then do you shift some of your resources so that you do address that? Or do you say, well, how high a priority are they in our group?
Right. And I think we're still figuring that out. I know that we do have some of the traditional resources. We have a newsletter that goes out a few times a year. And we have kind of implemented more actually traditional snail mail options than we thought we would be. And I think it'll be figuring out, really identifying who it is, possibly even individually, who are falling into that category, and even reaching out to them and asking them, what will work best, or how interested are you in this type of information? Because we've also had the opposite end where people have told us, please don't send me as many things as you have. It's really getting overwhelming. I prefer talking to you guys, just at follow-up times and things like that. So I think it's just going to be a case of really really feeling that one out. We don't want to lose it. We certainly don't want to lose the traditional resources that we're using now. So it almost seems like we're going to have to create time to really pick up without reorganizing away from those traditional sources.
Sure, excellent. Thanks very much for sharing your experience in implementing this. One other thing that came to my mind in listening to presentations and something to think about is, you all had some great statistics on usage, the percentage of people that are using Twitter versus Facebook. And one thing that I didn't see is how many people are using social media on mobile platforms who are from traditionally underserved communities. I know that my colleague Marta Garcia has done some research on the number of Spanish speakers who are their primary source of digital information is through their smartphones, which they can get at a lower cost than having internet at home, versus people who are in rural communities where broadband may not exist. And for the folks at MSKTC, how do you integrate those ideas into the planning for your social media outreach?
That is a great question. It's Diza. We do always try to incorporate people in, like you mentioned, underserved communities into our planning. So we are finding a way to make, just use the model systems, work with the grantees, and work with our own networking when we go to conferences, or if we're just using our website. You know, we do try to reach out to people and encourage them to pass on our information to their own networks and at least start disseminating that way. We do want to make sure we include everybody, so even if it's someone who sends an email about, you know, I'm looking for something or the other about a specific topic, we point them to that resource and then encourage them, you know, share this with your network, share this with your community or people that you work with, so at least if we can't target the people who have access to online resources, we're asking people who do to reach out to those persons and just make sure that we're getting out there. But we are trying to work to make sure that we get a hold of everybody.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And what about part of what we have to do at NET, what we are doing at NARIC is reaching out to Spanish-speaking communities. We have the bilingual information specialist. Have you considered the bilingual aspect of
Yep.
What has the reaction been from the model systems provider side in creating content that is culturally and linguistically appropriate?
So they're very supportive of doing that. Some of the products that we've translated have been the fact sheets. So far, we've also done a few of our brochures. We will possibly move into some of these tools, translating them to making them accessible as well. But the model system grantees have been very supportive of translating to something that makes it more accessible. Again, it's all about accessibility. Spanish is the more popular language that, you know, people prefer to be in if they're not English speaking. But we get a lot of support, and we do try to make sure that that's available on the website and to networks as well.
So I would encourage you know, any grantees that are developing their outreach strategies to, oh, sorry, I have a cat yelling in the background, to consider that so many of the underserved communities are coming to you from mobile platforms and are coming through social media. So that's a great way to get to people who may not get your information from traditional web searching or from going to the library or from their healthcare providers. I think that was kind of it from my reactions. They were very helpful. I think I've downloaded 5 different copies of all of these templates in different places over the last year or so, and have them going for different projects. So they're fabulous. I would encourage anyone to do so. And again, Bonnie, hope you feel better.
Well, thank you very much, Jess, and thank you again to all of our presenters who are still on the phone and who have presented today. Does anyone else have anything that they would like to say before we go ahead and end? No. Okay, well, I guess we can wrap up just a bit early today. So we hope that you've enjoyed today's sessions and that they've been useful to you and that you'll be able to apply what you learned to your NIDLR grants. And a huge thank you to Melanie Barwick, Jennifer Flagg, Diza May Smith, Allison Todd, Tiffany Brewer, and Amber Hammond. And of course, a special thanks to Jenny Moore and Jess Shakin. Of course, thanks to all of you who are online with us and who have also participated throughout the day. we're done for today, but we look forward to seeing you log on at 1 p.m. Eastern on Friday, the day after tomorrow, which will focus on barriers and facilitators of use of evidence by policymakers. So thanks once again, and have a nice evening.